Hello again everybody, welcome to the channel. So today I thought I'd run through this new pedal board that I've built. I have built it from scratch. It's all designed and built by yours truly. It's rough around the edges, but it does the job. So I thought I'd make a video for you, just running over exactly how I've put this board together, from the building process right through to laying out these pedals, deciding what goes where, and of course how everything functions and works together. So I think what I'll do is I'll create a 3-part series for this. This first video is going to go over the build itself, all of the different pedals and devices that I've got going on here, how it's all connected, and what everything does, basically. The next video, I'm going to go over the M1, which is this little screen over here, and how I've got that programmed with the foot switch and these 2 controllers that we'll talk about later. And in the third part, we'll go over the MIDI captain and how I've programmed that separately. So there's plenty to get through, so let's get stuck in. Before I did anything else, I wanted to decide on exactly which pedals I wanted to include on this build, and I used a website called Pedal Playground to plan everything out. It's a simple and free way to plan things, and you can select pedals and pedal boards from the list on the left-hand side, or you can just add your own dimensions and select the color and move everything over where you want it to be. I'll be honest, it took me a while to actually finalize everything, but in the end, I was happy with this layout that you can see. So the next thing that I did was I took the dimensions that I knew I was going to have, and then I looked for a case that would suit those dimensions. And I came across this Gator G-Mix 20x25 ATA mixer case, which fit the bill perfectly. So now I could start to plan to build the board to fit the case. I had a rough idea of how I wanted it to look, and I sketched out the design for the sides, which is loosely based on the NUX Bumblebee that I had before this. After mapping things out on Pedal Playground, I knew how much surface I would need for the bottom tier and the top tier. So the next thing I did, I went out and I bought a sheet of ply, as well as various bits of hardware, which you'll see later, a hinge, roller, catches, screws, etc. So after that, I measured up, started cutting. After shaping the sides, I planned out where I needed to cut out for the carry handles, and then I fit everything together with screws. At that point, I could then take final measurements for the additional things like where the Mod 3 was going to sit and the USB port that I have on this side. And I don't have a router, so I just shaped everything using a jigsaw, filed and sanded everything down, gave it a lick of paint, and then wrapped the back and sides in a faux leather. I also purchased some screw caps and screw covers, as well as the rubber feet for the bottom. So then I had the construction of the board built. I could then place the pedals into position. So before fitting them down, I mapped out exactly where my cables were going to run through the top tier. And then I just used a Forstner drill bit to make the holes. I also placed a couple of pedals on a smaller piece of ply, just to give me a little bit of extra height so that I can easily get to these foot switches. So now I could install the pedals properly using the good old 3M dual lock tape, as well as fit the Mod 3 and the USB port and everything else under the hood. I tested everything out, and then I tidied up the cables as best I could using the adjustable cable clips. And that was it. Job was done. And then it was just a case of making sure that everything was going to work as I intended it to. So now you know exactly how I put the board together. Let's talk about what everything is. I'll leave links down below to as many things as I can, but I've recently made videos on a few of these things. So over on the left-hand side, we've got the Pro FX6 V3 mixer. I've recently made a video on this, link in the corner and down below. It's a great little mixer. Go and check that video out. It was just the perfect size for me to fit on my pedal board. A lot of people might ask, why do you need a mixer on your pedal board? The RC600 has a mixer built in, but this has got the balanced XLR outs. Sometimes I won't use the RC600 at all, so I can just run a guitar and a vocal line into the mixer. I know it's a bit of overkill when the RC600 is on the board, but at least the mixer's all set up, ready to go. Moving on, behind the mixer, I've got my Legato in-ear monitor system, so I can just pull this off. This is the receiver, that's the transmitter, that's always plugged in. It's going into the phones of the RC600, and then I just clip this on when I want to use it, and I've got some in-ear monitors as well to stick in there. I just wanted to have it on the board so that I wouldn't forget it and everything is here when I need it. Then I've got my Luminite M1, which is a great MIDI device. I'm going to be making plenty of content on the M1, these 2 controllers, as well as the 10-button foot switch very soon, so stay tuned for that. We've got the MIDI Captain Mini 6, which is another MIDI controller. I've programmed all these buttons and colors, and I'll talk about that in another video. Above that, we've got the Amperos dual switch, which is just an extra 2 buttons for over here, my HX Stomp. This provides all of my guitar effects. Underneath that, we've got my tuner. I've got a Nectar Expression pedal. Going back to these 2 things here, these are just wireless controls for my M1. And I just pin them onto the pedal board. This is the EC controller, and I can cycle through a few things there. So it does have some adhesive strips on the back, which you can just mount onto your guitar or your instrument, but someone much brighter than me came up with this idea of using a money clip and then just clipping that onto your guitar strap and then being able to use it that way. So that's what I intend to use that one for. And then next to that is the XY controller. So this is more like a joystick. Again, I'll go over these in much more detail later on. And then on the bottom row, we've got the good old FS7 foot switch, which is just an additional 2 buttons for my RC600. And then, as mentioned, we've got the Nectar expression pedal. And then finally, this is the Luminine F10 wireless foot switch. It is wireless, so I can take it off the board if I wanted to, and if I needed to move those foot switches somewhere else. This is connected to this, these are connected to this, and I'll go through how everything's connected shortly. Let's have a look under the hood. So as mentioned, I put some hinges on, and hopefully you can see what's going on down here. It is a bit of a mess, don't get me wrong. I am certainly not a professional pedal board builder. There will be lots of people watching this video who will not be able to stand what's going on under here, but I've used some adjustable cable clips to tidy it up as best I can. We've got the Chox DC7. Again, I've made a video on that, and there'll be a link in the corner for you to go and check that out. Underneath this little batch of cables is the Mod 3, which is basically just a patch base so that I can run my guitar, my vocals, any other instruments that I want to feed through. Everything then is routed to the RC600 and then back out to the mixer. Finally, my daughter wanted me to install some LED lights because she likes bright lights, and to be honest, they look all right. Everything's powered by the DC7 except for the mixer, and I've just got this splitter. So the IEC runs out of the Mod 3 and then it splits off. One side powers the DC7 and then the other's just an extension so that I can just run the power for the mixer straight into that extension. So I've just put these hinges on. So when I built the board, I totally didn't factor in the hinge was going to come into contact with this XLR here. So I moved that over, and we've got enough room then for the XLR to run out of the Mod 3 into the RC600. And then I've got these little roller catches so that when I bring the top down, it just clips in nicely. Before we go any further, if you're finding this video useful, give it a like. It is a free way to support the channel. I do regularly post content like this covering all sorts of music gear, so do consider subscribing if that's something you're interested in. Anyway, let's get back to it. All right, so let's talk about how everything is actually connected. So my guitar line will run into input A on the Mod 3. It then runs through this hole and into the tuner. It goes out of the tuner, down into this hole, underneath, and into the HX stomp. We then come out of the HX stomp, and then that goes through another hole that I've drilled there into instrument 1 on my RC600. What happens there is a couple of things. That input is then fed to its own output and then straight out to channel 1 on my desk. Instrument 1 is also recorded to track 1, track 2, and track 5 on my RC600. So I've got 3 tracks dedicated for my guitar line. So there's a couple of different guitar parts as well as a bass line. And then each of those tracks are also routed to channel 1. So basically my guitar signal comes in, gets processed, goes into the RC600, and is fed to channel 1 on the desk. It's also recorded to its designated tracks on the RC600, which is also going to the same channel on the desk. So that means I know that my guitar signal will always go into channel 1. Occasionally I use my Meinl pickup cajon, and then I'll run that into input B. That will just go straight into the RC600 instrument 2. And again, gets recorded to a designated track, which in this case is track 6. And then that track is also fed to its own output and then into channel 3 on desk, as well as the live feed of that instrument going to channel 3. When I use the rhythm that's built into the RC600, that also goes to the same channel. So I suppose channel 3 is all of my different rhythms. So that could be the live instrument that I'm playing or the rhythm on the RC600. And then finally, there's an XLR input on the Mod 3. That just gets routed into mic 1 on the RC600. Again, straight through to its own output. And then it goes into channel 2 on the desk. And when I want to record my vocals to a loop, track 4 is the one that I use to put my vocals down. And then track 4 is also fed to channel 2. So again, that means all my guitar signal goes to channel 1, my microphone goes to channel 2, and then any rhythm, which will be my pickup cajon, shakers, tambourine, and the rhythm on the RC600 goes to channel 3. Okay, so let me briefly demonstrate what everything does. The RC600 is my looper. It's set up exactly how I like to have it set up. The FS7 controls a couple of different things within the looper, and then most of the time my expression pedal will just control the loop volume within the RC600. If you look on the screen, hopefully you can see this. I have 2 harmonies as my first 2 input effects. So this switch on the FS7 will toggle on the first one. I can turn that on and off. And then the second switch here will toggle both of them on. So if I wanted to add more harmonies, I can do it that way. As mentioned, the RC600 does what I want it to do, so I can obviously record my loops that way. I have track 1 and 2 for my guitar parts. Track 3 is this switch here. This is mainly for any kind of percussion that I record on the mic, shakers, tambourines, cowbells, that kind of thing. Track 6 is this one over here, which is for my minor pickup cajon as mentioned. And then in mode 2, I've got track 4, which is for vocals, any vocal parts that I want to record to the track. And then track 5 is for a bass line that I like to put down. The Polytune Mini 3 is basically a tuner, and it's a really reliable tuner. I much prefer using this tuner than the tuner built in the HX Stomp, to be honest. The HX Stomp is for all of my guitar processing, as mentioned. If I'm doing an acoustic gig, I'll mainly use 3 different presets. So this first one is an all-in-one preset that I use for strumming and finger picking. I've got a reverb, I've got a delay, and then I've got a bass tone that I can put on as well. The next one is just for bass. It's a little bit more bassy, so if I just want to put a bass line down over the top of my loops, I can do. And then the third one is mainly for strumming. So if I'm playing a particular song that requires more strumming, say, than finger picking, I'll use that preset. The Ampero switch at the top is connected to the HX Stomp, and that will change the screen that I can see over here. So I'll just scroll through. If I ever need to use that, rarely I'll need to use this, but it's there in case I need to change to a different screen on the HX Stomp. This one here is a boost for the guitar. So I'll just show you if I go across to the output. If you look at this output level, when I hit this switch, the output level is increased by 3.3 decibels. If I ever need a boost on the guitar, I can just hit that switch. And then finally, we can talk about the different MIDI controls. So it's taken me quite a while to set up. This is the iPad down here. I'm using an app called Songbook Pro, which is great for lyrics. I've also done a video on that. You can go and check that out. The M1 is connected to the iPad via Bluetooth, so there's no cables at all running to the iPad. The iPad can sit on my stand wirelessly, and then I can send all of these different messages over to that. The F10 wireless foot switch turns on and off different presets that I've programmed into the M1, and it basically just sends loads of different messages out so that I can have everything that I need at my feet. So let me go in here and I'll show you what I mean. I've got 10 different switches here, and then the first 3, 1, 2, and 3, are controlled by these 3 switches. I've got BX1, BX2, and BX3, and these just change different things within a song. So if I'm looping a particular song and I need certain tracks to stop and start at different points, I can use these, which are connected to some assigns in the RC600. So that's basically what they do, and it depends on the song. Sometimes I might only need 1, sometimes I might need all 3, sometimes I might not need any, but they're there at my feet in case I need them. Underneath this are my snapshots. So if you look over here at this little 1 on the HX Stomp, it will be snapshot 1, snapshot 2, and snapshot 3. If you don't know what snapshots are, they're a really useful way of using the HX Stomp. It basically allows you to change multiple parameters and save them in a snapshot so that you can turn them off and on with a single press. So snapshot 1 will just have my reverb turned on. Snapshot 2 will have the delay turned on, as well as changing a couple of other parameters in the HX Stomp. And then snapshot 3 turns the delay off and then turns the bass on as well. So that's these 6 buttons here. If you have a look at the iPad, you'll see that I programmed these 2 to scroll up and down the lyric sheet. So you can see I'm going down on the lyric sheet there and then up on the lyrics this way, which is handy. It means that I don't need to physically touch the iPad during a gig. My hands can be playing the guitar, and then I can just use my feet to toggle down in case I need to do that. And then finally, these 2 buttons will change the song. So you'll see my RC600 has with or without you selected. The M1 has with or without you. And then if I just go back to the top, my iPad also has with or without you. This will change the next song in the playlist. So I'm gonna go down. We've got Free Falling that's selected on the lyric sheet. Free Falling is set up on the M1, and then Free Falling is also selected on the RC600. And again, I'll switch down to the next one. It's starting over, etc. And I can just run through my songs that way, forwards and backwards. So the songs on the RC600, the M1, and the iPad will always correspond because that's the way that I've just set everything up. And in the next video, I'll run through exactly how I've programmed everything in the M1, just so that you're aware in case that's something that you're interested in. And then finally, we talk about these 2 controllers here. So as mentioned, this is the EC controller. It's a great little controller to have. And then I just clip this on using the money clip onto my guitar strap. I've got these set up to do 2 different things. If you have a look at the HX Stomp first, this will just cycle through the presets that I need when I'm doing an acoustic gig. So I've just set this left encoder up to go from my all-in-one preset to my bass preset and then over to my strumming preset. It will never go beyond that because that's the way that I've programmed it. So it's just these 3 presets that it will access when I'm doing my acoustic gig. And then if you look at the iPad, I've programmed the right encoder to zoom in and out of the lyric sheets. So if I go to another song, you'll see that this encoder zooms in and out. And the same with all of my songs, just so that I don't need to always physically touch the iPad. I can use my fingers to zoom in and out whilst this is on my guitar strap. And then next to that, we've got the XY controller, which is doing something a little bit different. So the joystick on the right will cycle through the songs exactly what these two buttons are doing. So if I didn't want to use my feet to cycle through the songs, I can do it this way. And then sometimes it might cycle a little bit too fast for the iPad. As you can see, I've got shape of you here and shape of you there. They're always going to be in sync. But if the iPad is ever out of sync, I've got this left controller here, which will just cycle through the lyrics on the screen. So the right one will change presets on everything, and then the left one will just be the lyrics on the iPad. So that's everything the M1, these controllers, and the wireless foot switch are doing. And I've programmed these 6 switches on the MIDI Captain to control various things within the RC600. So the first one here, you'll see that I've got quite a bright red color. And then when I disable it, it goes to more of a dim red color. Then I know when it's turned on and when it's turned off. And it's the same for all 5 of these switches. So when it's on, if I go into my record settings, you'll see I've got auto record turned on. And then when I turn this off, auto record turns off, so that I can disable auto record when I don't want to use it in a particular song. Below this, we've got these 3 different colors here, and they will just cycle through in a clockwise motion so that I can see when I physically push the button down. And what that does, it changes the input effect bank that I'm using on the RC600. So you can see I've got input effect bank A selected here. When I press this switch, we go to bank B, we go to bank C, we go to bank D, and then it just goes around in a cycle that way. At the top here, this orange one will engage a track effect. In this case, it's a low pass filter, so it'll turn on track effect C. I rarely use it, but it's there in case I need it. Going back to my input effect banks, I'm just going to go to bank C, and you'll see I have a delay set here as effect A on bank C, and then this purple switch will engage that delay. So this is a delay that's just for my vocals in case I ever want to use that. The blue ring is a rhythm start stop, so you'll see this rhythm light here engage when I press that down, and that means the internal rhythm within the RC600 is playing whichever beat that I've programmed for that particular song, and I can turn it off and on with this button up here. And then finally, this one's a little bit different. This yellow one stays solid, and this is actually a note message. This sends, if I just turn my mixer on and go across to the rhythm out, this just sends a kick drum out to channel 3 on my mixer. Just in case I ever want to pad out a song and I need a little bit more of a kick sound coming through, I can use that way. In terms of the MIDI messages, the M1 is the main hub. The wireless foot switch and then these 2 controllers here, the EC and the XY controller, are all wireless and they communicate with the M1. I come out of the M1, it goes into the MIDI Captain, and then it goes through the MIDI Captain into the RC600, and then the RC600 out to the HX Stomp. The reason that I've done it that way is so that I can send the internal clock of the RC600 to the HX Stomp. And what that means is when I've recorded a particular loop, all of my time-based effects, delays, reverbs, etc. will sync up to the RC600. And I think I've pretty much covered everything that I wanted to do in this first video. The next video, I'm going to go through the M1 and how I've set everything up. Stay tuned for that. And then in part 3, we'll go over the MIDI Captain and how I've programmed this, including all of these lights. As mentioned earlier, I'll leave links to as much as I can down below. If you found the video useful, you can like, subscribe to the channel to stay in the loop. And as always, everybody, I'll see you in the next one.